Have you ever felt insignificant or ordinary? Do you feel like other people don't really see you? Do you ever scroll through social media and just feel completely inadequate compared to all the beautiful and successful people out there? Well, join me in this episode as we discover an ancient story from thousands of years ago that turns that idea completely on its head and reveals a startling truth that you, yes you, are a dirt creature. Imagine with me, if you will, that you are an ancient Babylonian living in the city of Babylon in the 6th century BC. And for you, life is pretty ordinary. You're a farmer, you're a landowner, just like your father and just like his father before him. And you occupy a fairly privileged position in Babylonian society because you're not a slave. You are a free citizen of Babylon. And just like the ancestors that came before you, you live in a multi-generational farming family. Every single day, you leave the safety of the city walls and venture out into the fields to work the land with all of your slaves and all of your servants and all of your family members. And if you're lucky, you'll be able to get a full work day in, undisturbed. If you're unlucky, maybe a raiding party of Persians or Elamites will come down from the mountains and you're going to have to leg it back to Babylon. Life can be unpredictable, but it doesn't bother you because you know that the gods are on your side. After all, you are living in the greatest empire the world has ever known up until this point. No one would ever think to challenge the might and the power of Babylon. Ishtar, Nabu, and Leal, these are your gods. But chief among the gods is Marduk. Marduk is the patron god of the city of Babylon. He is the storm god, the god of all the weathers, and he is also king of the gods and ruler over all creation. And as long as you give part of your earnings to the gods at their temples, and so long as you pay your taxes to the son of the gods, the king, all will go well for you and your family. You're secure in your place in society because you know the story that your people tell about who you are and why you're here. The story goes like this. Once upon a time, everything was chaos. The world was not as it is now. The world was only the dark, deep chaos waters. And ruling over these chaos waters were two deities, two gods named Abzu and Tiamat. Abzu and Tiamat were husband and wife, and they ruled over all creation, which was just mainly the chaos waters. But then one day, this couple of gods decided that they wanted to have children. And so that's what they did. And a whole bunch of other younger gods were birthed into the world. But over time, these gods, these younger gods, began to annoy the two parents. And so one day, Father Abzu decides that he is going to do the unthinkable. He is going to kill his children. Seems pretty brutal, but that's what he decides. And his wife, Tiamat, the sea dragon, is appalled at his decision. And she warns one of her children, a god named Enki. And Enki doesn't know what to do, but he thinks and he thinks and he thinks and decides eventually that the logical thing to do is to kill his father before his father can kill him and the rest of his brothers and sisters. And so that's what he does. He slays Abzu. And this act of patricide upsets his mother, the mother who warned him, and she decides that maybe Abzu was right. And so she decides she's going to kill her children anyway. And so Tiamat, the sea dragon, raises an army and wages war on her children, the young gods, out of her bitterness and her grief at the loss of her husband. She also convinces one of her children, one of the young gods, Kingu, to join her and betray his brothers and sisters. And it doesn't look very good for the young gods, because a war is fought, and soon all of the cosmos is fighting each other. And the young gods fight against the old god Tiamat, and their armies clash, and over again, the young gods come out as the losers. And so all seems lost. It seems that Tiamat is going to do what she set out to do. She is going to kill the young gods once and for all. And when all hope is lost, one of the young gods, a storm god, a weather god by the name of Marduk, raises his hand and he says, "You know what I'll do? I am going to ride out and I am going to face my mother and I am going to kill her on behalf of all of you. I know how to do it. I've got a plan." And all the other gods are excited and they say, yes, anything, do it. And Marduk says, hold on a second. There's one catch. I will do this, but in return, you will make me the king of the gods. And so, Marduk goes to battle, and he rides out, and he fires a great arrow at his mother, Tiamat, the sea dragon. And the arrow, this enormous, powerful arrow, strikes her and splits her in half, killing her and ending the war. Marduk then takes her body, and with one half, he creates the heavens, and with the other half, he creates the land. And the gods capture the traitorous Kingu, the brother of theirs who joined Tiamat's side, and they kill him as well. And as a final insult, they create a new race of being from the body of this dead god, the very first humans. This is the story the priests, the nobles, the king, your family have told you all of your life. This is the story that your father told you when you were young, and that you tell your children. This is the only story that you've ever known. There is no other alternative, no other version of events. As far as you and your people are concerned, this is the only story. Consider with me for a moment this story. What is it really saying about you, your world, and your place within it? The first thing that I can think of is that you are a slave. This story, at its most basic, tells you one thing, that you are a slave. That's what the holy texts say. In fact, you've heard it being said by the priests. There's a tablet that they read out and that says that the gods created mankind, on whom they imposed the service of the gods and set the gods free. Did you notice who gets set free and who is enslaved? Humans are created in order to relieve the gods of the menial duties of life, of the tilling of the earth, herding the livestock, building their temples. The entire point of humanity is to be a slave race, at the pleasure of the gods and the servants of the gods. But this story also makes you into something else. It tells you that you are an afterthought. It tells you that you weren't designed by some master craftsman with the most exquisite of materials. You weren't created thoughtfully or with any degree of artistic intention, love, or affection. In fact, your very existence is a constant reminder of a villain, the traitorous Kingu, the god who betrayed his brothers and his sisters. This means that humanity, at its very core, must be an untrustworthy race of people. After all, they are made from the corpse of a fundamentally untrustworthy character. I mean, you can think about it like this. Humans are only good for slavery. After all, you wouldn't want to give them too much power. An untrustworthy race, they wouldn't know what to do with it. You're an afterthought, nothing more. And the third thing is this: you can never change. Now, sure, there are exceptions to this, but the picture of humanity is one of singular purpose, one of you can never change. Now, if you were a king or a member of the royal family or somebody in the priesthood, yeah, you're a little closer to the gods. In fact, in your culture, the king is often referred to as a son of the gods or having the image of the gods. The king is special. The king is different, but not you. You're ordinary. You're nobody. Even though you're a citizen, yeah, sure. But compared to the royals, compared to the priests, compared to those in power, you can never change. You can never raise your station above that you've been given. You are a slave and nothing more. This special place of privilege that the king has and only the king has, it wasn't given by just simple might. It was divine, which means that if you were the king, the gods had placed you in that position themselves by might and by divine right. However, if you were not of royal lineage, you had no hope of ever ascending to the realms of the gods. You are forever doomed to serve the gods, a slave, and be grateful for whatever grace they might choose to extend to you in your pitiful, insignificant, meaningless existence. Now, I said earlier that this is the only story you've ever known. But what if I told you that not too far away, there's another story that is being written? And there is another story that's beginning to be told that has some of the same elements of the one that you already know, but with a radically different outcome. Would you be interested in learning that story? Because not too far from the Neo-Babylonian Empire, there is a small group of people known first as Jacob's seed, or the tribe of Israel, and they are beginning a civilization on their own. Of course, this civilization is nowhere near as impressive as Babylon, but nevertheless, you begin to take notice. And one day, you hear their story, and it changes something inside of you. This story begins much like yours. Genesis 1, verse 1. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Now, you've never heard of this God before, but he calls himself Elohim. And like Marduk, he takes an empty, barren world and creates something good and ordered out of it. First, he separates light from dark, the waters from the land, and then he fills these spaces with living creatures, with plants, with animals. And at the very end, as his sort of final flourish over the act of creation, he decides to make one more living thing. Genesis 1, verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." Now, this word, humankind, what does it mean? Well, in the ancient Hebrew language, the word humankind is Adam. And even though we think of that as a man's name, Adam or Adam is actually a gender-neutral noun. So it just simply means humankind. And the funny thing about this word is it sounds a heck of a lot like another Hebrew word, Adamah, which means dirt, earth, or ground. Are you seeing where I'm going with this? This is the story that so subverts the existing story, that God creates an entire world out of the chaos waters, and as his final act of creation, he makes a race of dirt creatures that he calls Adam, or humankind. But unlike the fish in the sea, and the kangaroos, and the wolves, and the parakeets, and the trees and the hedges, and everything else in creation, he creates these people in his image. Everything else, he speaks and it is so. But these Adamah, these dirt creatures, are different, and different in a way that blows you, a Babylonian, away. Because the subversion in this story is not that humans are created as an afterthought or as a slave race, but they are wonderfully and beautifully made, crafted by the hands of an intentioned craftsman. The first thing that we should notice is the fact that these dirt creatures are not wholly unique or original designs. They're modeled after an image created to be like the creator Elohim himself. Furthermore, they are created for a specific purpose. They are created to rule. Think about this from the perspective of a Babylonian and from almost anybody living in the ancient Near East in Mesopotamia at the time. This wouldn't have just been difficult to understand. This idea itself goes against everything you've ever known. After all, in your tradition, the gods don't share power. They bicker among themselves, they wage war, and they kill each other to prove who's boss. They'd never think to share that power, let alone with lowly humans. Not only that, but this new story seems to suggest that you are made in the image of God himself, which is absurd because, after all, only the king is made in the image of God. Everybody knows it. Your father, your spouse, your children, your neighbors. You are a slave, born from the dead flesh of Kingu, the betrayer god, and you are not made in the divine image. Only the king gets to claim that privilege. Only he is worthy to be called a son of the gods. Only he is made in their image. Now think about this from an ancient Jewish perspective. As an ancient Jew, you are hyper-aware of the stories of your neighbors, who insist that humanity is nothing more than an afterthought. All of the ancient cultures around you all say the same thing because all of the cultures around you borrowed from each other to tell their stories about creation. But your story is different. Your story says that we are a race of dirt creatures, yes, but that Elohim didn't leave us in the dirt. Rather, he invited us to rule and to reign alongside him. Rather than hoarding his power and authority for himself, God actually wanted to share it with humanity and wanted us to govern his creation as his royal reflections. It's almost like we are kind of intended to be an image. That's what the psalmist in Psalm chapter 8 is talking about when he looks at the expanse of the universe and he declares beautifully, "When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have established, what are human beings that you are mindful of them? Mortals that you care for them. Yet you have made them a little lower than the divine beings and crowned them with glory and honor. You have given them dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under their feet, all sheep and oxen, and also the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, and the fish of the seas, whatever passes along the paths of the seas." I want you to just stop for a moment and think, this is Psalm chapter 8. This is going a little bit into the Bible. What is the psalmist talking about? He's talking about creation. And he's not just talking about creation. He's talking about your place and my place within creation. See, there's this fallacy, I suppose, that many people think that the first humans were nothing more than gardeners, caretakers. They were there just to take care of the animals and to plant trees and bushes and shrubs and flowers and all sorts of things. But the calling that is on the people, the humanity that God created in the very first pages of Genesis, is far higher than I ever realized, and that perhaps you ever realized as well. God didn't just create us to be caretakers of the land. He created us to be rulers, to have dominion over it. Not so that we could exploit the land, that we could take everything from it, but that we could be wise caretakers, wise rulers. What an incredible responsibility, and what an incredible honor. It says in Psalms that we are literally crowned with glory and honor. God's glory and honor. You have been crowned with God's glory and honor. And whatever space and whatever place that you are in, this is the calling that you have on your life. This is the calling that I have on my life, to be a wise custodian of the space and the place that God has given you. Now, let's consider this a little more. Let's consider the humanity angle of this. You and I, according to this story, are not just simply human beings. We're not ordinary. We're not an afterthought. We are actually creatures made in the divine image of God. In part, we are divine, which is a strange thing to consider because, to be honest, most of the time, I don't feel divine. Most of the time, I feel pretty ordinary. And even though the Babylonian Empire is long gone now, many of us today feel the same way that these ancient people felt thousands of years ago. Our modern society has a way of making us feel small, unimportant, insignificant. We constantly compare ourselves to others on social media platforms, in our workplaces, in our friend groups. And when we compare ourselves to other people, ultimately, it makes us feel ugly, poor, unsuccessful, and unworthy. It's so insidious when we compare ourselves to others, because comparison is a trap. It's never going to make you feel better about yourself, because there's always going to be somebody who's smarter than you, who's prettier than you, who's more fit than you, and who's richer than you. And the truth is, our world is run by people, politicians, who also aspire to these same ideals, to the realms of divinity, and yet are constantly proven to be corrupt, ineffective, and fraudulent. In reality, the real powers behind our elected officials are often big corporations who can do whatever they want with seemingly no consequences and no accountability. These multinational, multi-billion-dollar companies are almost like the image of the 21st century's new gods, the gods of profit, progress, and greed. And so, when I look at this world, with all of its complexities, all of its injustices, and all of its overwhelming pressure, I have to ask myself, who am I that anyone should care about me? Who am I, an insignificant person living on this insignificant little blue dot hanging in place in the cosmos? When I consider my place, not only in this world, but in the universe, I feel pretty small. When I compare myself to the people around me, I feel pretty insignificant. There's always somebody who's doing something more important, who's earning more money, who's living in a nicer house. Sometimes when I look at the state of the world, it feels like there's nothing that I can do to make the world better. All of the problems in the world are so deeply ingrained, so systemic, so big that who am I to be able to look at the world and say, you should change? The truth is, most of the time, we feel pretty insignificant. But in reality, we aren't. In fact, you and I, God says, are far from insignificant. God says that we are created in His divine image, the image of a God who cares for us, who crafted us from the dirt, and who calls each one of us by name. You don't have to allow the story of ancient Babylon, nor the story of this world to tell you who you are. You don't have to let the story that says you don't matter, you're not significant, you can never contribute, you can never be more than what you are right now, tell your story for you, because there's a better story. And this story starts with in the beginning. So, if you ever feel lonely, lost, or just insignificant in the wide world that you live in, remember this. There is a God out there who has not just heard of you, who has not just thought of you, who has not just looked toward you, but who loves you and who has crowned you with glory and honor. He has shared his glory, he has shared his honor with you. There's a God out there who gives you dominion over his creation. And despite the darkness, the suffering, and the pain we experience every day, still holds out his hand and says, I want to share my divinity with you, if only you'll reach out and start a relationship with me. There's a God out there who says, you can be a force for good in the world. Even though there's so much in the world that is so big and so overwhelming, he says, if you trust me, and if you come to me, and if you reach out to me, I can do great things in and through you. Now, I don't know about you, but that seems like a pretty great story. And that seems like too good an offer for me to turn down. What about you?